Welcome to the first episode of the new season of the Unity in Christ podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Drummond Littrell. With me today is a very special guest, someone I've known for a little while now. Her name is Amy Hunter, and she is a fierce leader in the fight for justice and equality, as well as a longtime community activist in the St. Louis area. Amy Hunter is also an internationally known speaker. She's done at least a couple of TED Talks that I know about and who brings global attention to issues of racial injustice. Amy is a diversity and inclusion strategist, having helped numerous organizations to incorporate diversity into their hiring practices. She currently serves as Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and talent acquisition at Caleres, a global footwear company based right here in St. Louis, Missouri. Amy, welcome back to the
Thanks.
podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And for full disclosure for our listeners, you did an interview with me back in May. And then St. Louis, unfortunately, got hit by that devastating tornado. So that took some time, away. And then we had some technical issues. So I really appreciate your graciousness for coming back today. How did you fare with the tornado, by the way? How did
Yeah,
your
I was
family?
actually in Arizona for work, so I missed the entire thing. It hit my cell phone, and I came home that Friday night and then started volunteering that Saturday morning. I wasn't personally affected, but I feel like, they're my people, right? Like it's both my grandma's houses were hit. They both my grandmothers are deceased, but my childhood memories, all of those things were happening in that space. I felt like the people who it affected were my neighbors, even though I don't live there. I feel like I grew up in that space. Fairgrounds Park and O'Fallon Park and the Y I go to all the time to swim. So as much as you can believe that community is community, it felt like my cousins. I have to go take care of my cousins. So spent quite a few times volunteering almost every day for the first couple of weeks because there was just so much need. And so,
Yeah. For our listeners who are outside of the St. Louis area, the area that was hit hardest was one of the most economically depressed areas of St. Louis. And it was really hard to see. I didn't grow up in St. Louis City, but my father had a business there. I have other relatives who were there. I had a 92-year-old aunt who's been displaced from her home because the roof was blown off while she was in her house, in her living room, and her garage was damaged. So, what are your thoughts about what's happening with that as we talk about your work as an activist and social justice? I know you said you've been volunteering, but what are you seeing as far as equity to things that are needed, access, equity and
oh my
access
God.
to,
It's
yeah.
night and day, right? Of the Central West End was also hit, a pretty affluent neighborhood and community. Those individuals got hotels that same night. Some leased apartments for a year while their homes are being worked on, versus North St. Louis, which is where I spent all of my time. And those individuals were worried, even when insurance companies came. Like maybe it was in my mom's name, but and we've been paying on the policy, for example. Like I was talking to a woman, and the insurance company was saying they weren't sure if they could cover it because the mother had died 3 years earlier. There's a whole ordinance in St. Louis City where when you make an insurance claim, the city of St. Louis and the ordinance got to take 25% of your um, reimbursement. And so they had to work to get that removed so that the insurance companies wouldn't give 25% of whatever you were going to get to the city of St. Louis. But when you think about just systemically, like what's in place, a lot of intergenerational homes, a lot of homes that weren't insured are insurable. So they had fire insurance, but not like wind insurance. And so it's not just that the tornado hit, you're noticing the economic disadvantages of Black and Brown folks in real time in something as racialized as housing, right? So in the home that my grandmother lived in, it was an all white community when she moved in. I think she was the first or the second Black family on that street. And now it's all Black in the entire community. Quite a few Hispanic people have moved into that space. So you're looking at people who couldn't have sold their homes for twice as much as if it had been in Clayton or University City or some other affluent suburb. So there isn't this like intergenerational wealth that you've inherited. There is this beautiful home you've inherited maybe, but also brick homes. Some homes that still didn't have forced air and heating. There are radiators, and so all of these like just very systemic things that have racial intersections with them. And in real time, you could see the people who have were fine, and the people that didn't were devastated. People were sleeping in tents. There was no, I mean, there's no Wi-Fi. There's no, I mean, all the things that we're so accustomed to, just getting the word out that I'm okay or safe to my family who may live away. A lot of elderly people who did want to leave. So, I mean, I think the first couple of weeks, people were just sheltering in place with no running electricity anywhere. Trees were down for a couple of weeks. So it was really, I mean, very, very different around class and race, the
Right.
experience. And we were all, I mean, the tornado hit, people were devastated. Even the conversation around the 3,000 trees in Forest Park. They're like, "Did you know 3,000?" I'm like, "I could care less about a park." I'm like, these are real
And
people.
these are people.
These
Yeah.
are and they're real people. They're people. They're people deserving of humanity and dignity and all the things in housing. And so I
Mhm.
think the second weekend we could see people come out and really help, which is also very beautiful. I do think we have the human capacity to love strangers. And so that was really beautiful to see. There's so many people just lifting trees and debris and all the skills we didn't know we had, like tarp and a roof.
Right, right. You mentioned the difference in the response and people being in hotels that same night who were from one socioeconomic level to another. My sister lives in the Central West End. Her neighborhood actually had something in place that allowed them to rebuild. It was a fund. I don't know whether it was funded by additional taxes or whether it was a neighborhood association thing, but they were fine within a matter of days because of that fund. Their neighborhood was back to normal. And it really is incredible that the people who need the resources the most are the ones who are struggling to get by. This leads me to the TED Talk that you did about 10 years ago
Yeah.
called Lucky Zip Codes. And you talked about this very thing. You're a woman ahead of your time, or you're in time, you're on time because this has been going on for a while. But you did talk about that 10 years ago and how it makes a difference into which zip code you're born in St. Louis, or where you live in St. Louis. Why is that? In addition to some of the things you just mentioned, what is the deal with the zip codes? What's the history of that?
Yeah, I mean, so historically, the United States has had this love of property, like land, whether it's, the attempted genocide of the Native American people and taking their land, but also this wealth distribution attached to land. And so one of the things we pay really close attention to is what does that look like like in today's times? And in today's times, it looks like if you own land, you can then pass that land on to your family members. And in the best case scenario, like how this is really supposed to work is whatever house you buy today should be worth more in 40 years than it is today. And you get to pass that wealth on to your children. The exact opposite has happened in Black space, which we could see during the devastation of tornado. People indeed had moved into white spaces, but the property values have decreased so much that people didn't have insurance. Their property wasn't insurable versus the affluent communities that were well insured. And so you see, like, whether it's the link to education and the quality of schools with your zip code, or the access to like insurance and insurance rates as it's attached to your zip codes, really looking at this not just as an individual, like how did I fare, but systemically and institutionally, how are Black and brown people faring who own homes? Like these are homeowners, these aren't renters, these are homeowners. They should be doing as well or comparable to their white counterparts, and they're not. And they're not because they're not working every day. Every neighborhood I went to, these were hardworking people. Everybody had a job, and they were still just trying to get by. But they have a failing school system. There are some other systemic things: over policed spaces, under resourced spaces, access to like hospitals, and just quality. There's no Starbucks. There's no grocery store, Walmart, they're in food deserts. Like all of these things play a part in your life and how you live your life and how you experience life. So, if we're paying attention to zip codes, we're going to notice how inequitable the systems are in place as it relates to where
Yeah.
we live.
And talk about that. I mean, St. Louis was set up
Mhm.
that way, right? St.
Yes.
Louis was set up to divide, to have a have and have nots system. People weren't allowed to live in certain areas, which has now, generations later, impacted generational wealth. Can you speak to that?
It has impacted generational wealth for honestly for all of us. I wish we could see it like as the total sum of the game. We have 94 municipalities here in St. Louis because every time we moved out of the city, which was predominantly white in St. Louis City, with the exception of a few carve out spaces like Mill Creek Valley, which is where the arch is right now. We had black cities. There was a black city in Webster. There was one in Kirkwood, Meacham Park. Certainly Kinloch was
North
thriving
County.
black,
Yes.
right? It's in the
Mhm.
county as well. Businesses, the Black Wall Street, like all those things were happening here in St. Louis. And then over time, the systems wore down those things, and white people just kept moving further and further out to St. Charles, which was half black, because this was a slave state. So, and it was on the river. And in the early 1900s, there was a riot. A black man was accused of raping a white woman in St. Charles. And so all the black people run out. So in my lifetime, I was told not to go without understanding the full context of the why black people couldn't go to St. Charles, but that's because there had been a situation there much earlier in my great grandmother's lifetime, that she did remember and recall, happening. And so, we're not talking about like so long ago. I guess that's the other piece of when you talk to native St. Louisans, they remember when Kinloch was thriving, and they remember the beautiful spaces of integrating, North St. Louis City and Baden, places where people hear about and only like crime now. And the articulation of living in a black community was just living in a black community. They weren't called ghettos. It wasn't, called urban. It was just a community of people who were black. And I think the dehumanization of black people leads to moments like this where we are not able to see their full humanity, even in a tornado, even if they're children, even if they're hurt or sick. And so I think that is the ask. The ask is that we see black people as human beings and then work to solve those solutions. If I told you like South City had gotten hit with, which is majority white, the reaction of people, the pause, the lack of the National Guard coming, the lack of FEMA coming for almost 3 weeks, the response of the mayor not being feeling comfortable, safe going into those spaces. Like I felt completely safe going into those spaces. Those are my people. They look like me, right? And they had this horrible tragedy that just happened. Like not one bad thing. People were happy. A woman hugged me as I was one night. I was handing out candles, um, and because there's no electricity and it was getting dark, and I was like, "Do you need candles? Do you need lighters?" Um, and she was like, "Thank you so much," and just wept. And to think about, and it's not over, right? We're 6 weeks out, and people
Yeah.
still weren't in their homes. Like it didn't just end because people got tired of volunteering. One of the really horrible moments I had was we were trying to place an elderly woman in housing. She couldn't stay there. She was sheltering in place, didn't want to leave her home, but it was clear like the power's not going to be restored. More than half of her roof was gone and leaking but anytime it rained. And so I got on a mission to try to find her a place to live because she was on a fixed income. All the places for mom, like, no, you have to have like thousands of dollars to just move into a nursing home. And I was like,
Yes.
what are we going to do with our elderly people? And, as an African American, those were like
Or a
huge
home to
help.
sell. Yeah, a
Yeah.
home to sell so
Well,
that
she
they
had
could
done
live.
a reverse mortgage.
Mm,
So she didn't really own her home anymore.
yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
she was upset and she's like, I had to do what I had to do. Look, I get this, right? The the way in which systemic poverty impacts your lives is as an elderly person who didn't have social security, worked domestic most of her life, all of the things that go into this conversation, the system isn't set up to take care of everybody all the time. And so here we have a moment, something unpreventable like a tornado, and now we're scrambling to try to find housing. So luckily, the urban league helped her, but
But you and I, we've been, like I said, we've known each other from different circles. We've been near each other in proximity.
Mhm.
We went to the same high school, but not at the same time. We do the similar work. We've done similar work. And but you and I have been talking about these things for a long time. And I want to go back a little bit to what I think was maybe the beginning for you and this effort to try to get people to understand, to get white people to understand and to listen. There's a program called Witnessing Whiteness,
Yeah.
and you had something to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I started that little program. That's good.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. But the
I think it's
ultimate
always,
goal of the goal of the program was to get white people involved in understanding racism, right? And then having their own conversations in their own spheres of influence. Tell more about that. And
I think I've always held up the highest hopes for people. Like just as a person, I've always like had a very optimistic spirit. I don't know if it's because I had really great parents who were very optimistic about life. And so I definitely have a faith as well. I think my faith helps a lot. Like I've seen things happen that I could not explain, that I would have never imagined, including my own life. Like my life has worked out much better than I personally had planned. And so for that, I'm grateful. And so that gives me like not just hope, but the power of witnessing, what grace and glory looks like. And so I think I was holding out the highest hopes for people too. I felt like this thing we call racism could be solved, but like it's really clear we're not all on the same page of understanding what it is. And I was like, well, if more people knew, they'd work to solve it. And I had studied some cross-racial groups that didn't work because it's exhausting to people of color to have to constantly teach and explain. And so I piloted this new program called, which was new at the time, called Witnessing Whiteness, named after the book Witnessing Whiteness. Not that creative, for white people. But it's my hope for white people. Like, look, you guys could learn what racism looks like and then teach each other. And you don't need people of color to share their grief stories. Scholars call it grief porn, so that you can learn from us. You actually can tap into your own humanity. Notice what scripts you might have received as a child, not your fault, right? We all get scripts as kids. And then work to make the world a better place. And so thousands of white people have done this now. And as I meet them over time, because I did it for a while and then I moved on to a different job, but I've met so many people and like, it changed my life. I'm like, yes, because the change in your life is to bring you closer, not just to people of color, but to other white people too. And I would offer, in my very spiritual way, like I think we're all children of God. And so the closest that I feel that I have with God, I feel like I can see in other people. And I feel like that's sometimes what we're missing in the joy in our lives. But we could have it. We could have that joy in our lives. We just have to decide that that's what we really want and then move past our fear of rejection to get it. And so it's been great. And I mean, nurses, teachers, all people from all walks of life have been through there. So when I think about like what our systemic changes, I hope that helps in changing the systems. Like we've impacted people's lives in that way, in a really positive, loving way. We have to bring food. I'm Black, so like you had to bring some food. And they were like, "We're gonna make a chart." I was like, "You don't have to make a chart. Just bring some food." It's not about what you're eating or whose turn it is. It's just about being together. And
it's the fellowship. Yeah, it's
yes,
the fellowship piece. That and our stories are also similar in that we both have Black children.
mm,
We're both mama bears,
mm,
and we both had some pretty heavy things to happen. Nothing that in which a life was lost or anything like that, thank God. But we've had to talk with our kids about certain things. And one of the stories that you got into in your TED talk about the lucky zip codes was your son when he was 12 years old. Can you share more about that? And you had to have, well, you
yeah,
probably already had the talk with him, but
we had.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike Brown is killed, and Tracy Blackman, who's a friend of mine, asked me to talk about what it's like to be a Black mother. And that was the first time in 10 years I had told the story. That child was then in college. I mean, and it took me, I promised myself 10 years ago from that moment that I would not tell the story anymore because every time I told the story, I cried. And I was like, I'm just not going to tell people what happened to my kid until Mike Brown was killed. And she was like, what is it like? And I was like, let me tell you what it's like. And I'm a mother of four, but our first kids are twins. And my husband and I were talking about when we were going to tell them, like, well, how old should they be before you have this conversation? And we decided, when they got to be my height, but I'm only 5 feet tall, that we tell them. So they're 10. We're telling them, we sit them down in the living room on the couch, and we're like giving them the talk. You're going to be stopped by the police. And when you're stopped, this is how you have to respond and act. This is what we want you to do. And, we'll fight your fight, but we want you to come home. We really want you to come home. And so my son at 12 was in middle school. His friends were drinking in the Loop, which is a popular place in where I live. Where we live kind of in a college town, so it's where there's streets and malls and fun things for everybody to do. He decided not to partake in drinking and walked home. I live about a mile away, and he was stopped by law enforcement, and um, he asked a lot of questions, like, did he get stopped because he was black? And then he describes to me what he's wearing, because in his mind, he had like, if I look preppy, like, so he's like, I'm wearing a polo and Sperry topsiders, and my shirt is tucked in. I'm wearing a belt. In his mind, because he's only 12 years old, he's like decided, like, I'm not going to be stopped by the police because I look a particular way. And of course, I mean, we're parents, so we're like, that it doesn't matter what you have on, what kind of car you're driving. It doesn't. None of that matters. You're going to be stopped. Um, and then he was, because he's 12, he's trying not to cry, and it was his last question that caught me. And because he's like rapid fire asking the questions, and he said, "Mommy, I just want to know how long this is going to last." And I was like, "For the rest of your life." It's for me, it's that moment. Like, I don't want mothers to have to say that. I don't want that to be the case, or the reality of Black boys, men, brown boys, and men. I've met white moms who have Black kids. Like, we could end this, and not just, we talk about law enforcement a lot, but I could have talked about school or healthcare, going into the hospital. I mean, all the ways that we have to navigate spaces because of our race, and the inhumane treatment of Black people, generally speaking. And I just want to live in a world where that's not the case. And I know it's possible because my white counterparts already have it. So it's not like I have to dream real hard or look real far. I look to I'm like, oh, you guys, you're not worried that your teacher's not going to like your kid because of their race? Like, I would like to not be worried about that.
Yeah, I wanted that too. I'm created in the image of God. I should
Yep.
have that. I am valuable and have intrinsic value and all of that. Part of my story, the reason I started Love One Another Ministries is because of my son being called the N-word at his school in seventh grade. It was a Catholic school, a Christian school, and it was predominantly white. Yes. I think you and I have had conversations about access, and what you just talked about access, being able to have access to great education and all of that. That was important to me. So yes, I took the risk of sending my children to schools that were predominantly white, where the education was. And also, it was important to me that they go to a school where there was a biblical foundation. So we made that choice. We took that risk, and in seventh grade, my son David was called the N word. And having you did well. I did not want to have the talk
Mm,
before. I just didn't want to have them have to grow up too quickly
mm.
by
Yeah.
having the talk at a young age. I know you said you waited until your kids were your height.
Mm,
Um, my former husband and I had not decided. We knew we would have to, but that was a pivotal moment when we had to have it with both of our sons. This is how other people see you. This is how other people are going to view you, no matter what you're wearing, no matter. I, at the time, though, was involved in a prayer group with several white women.
mm,
Well, actually, this happened to my son after Mike Brown's death. But at the
mm,
time of Mike Brown's death, I was involved in a prayer group with several white women. There was one other Black woman. We would pray for our children,
mm.
right?
Yeah.
But when I started speaking out about Michael Brown, none of those women came. None of those women were,
Mm,
when I expressed my heart and poured my heart out about that. So I'm just wondering, I'm not sure what else is. I mean, I'm approaching this from a biblical perspective. So Jesus says, we're
Yeah.
supposed to love one another. And you talk about love too, but how do we
I
keep
talk about love a
talking?
lot. I love love. Like love is good. God's love is good. It's abundant, you know. I think in the scarcity model we have right now, like I think these are moments to remind each other there's enough. You know, there's plenty actually. Um and like we have the same conversation. I have a daughter. So like I've had a similar conversation with my daughter about her safety, right? Around rape and being manipulated and because violence against girls and women still happens. It is like just a 180 of racism, right? But it's linked. And so I think, you know, solving for this solves for other things too. I would love to live in a world where my daughter could jog at 3 o'clock in the morning if she wanted to. I mean, I'm not going to jog, but if she wanted to jog, she could, you know. And again, our male counterparts already have this reality. So it's not like I'm asking for something that's so out of reach. Um, but I do think I don't know. I think maybe people lack the faith that things could change and be different, or the vision of what it could look like, or the belief that it could be that way for everyone. But I believe it could be that way for everyone in my
I
whole
do
heart.
too.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I think fear has such a grip on people though when it comes to this, whether it's having the conversation, because I don't want to offend anybody, or having a conversation and then having to look within it myself, or whatever the fear is. But you have been also, I'm switching gears a little bit, but you've been instrumental in making sure that companies are doing what they need to do in terms of bringing inclusivity into their hiring practices and making sure that there are people at the table who don't all look the same. Why is that also important for business?
Mhm. I mean, okay, so like joy is my favorite word of all words. It's oh, I mean, it explains like how I feel on the inside. Like I'm like, how do you like explain this word when you're like, "Yee, yee, yee, yee," like what's a word for that feeling, right?
Can I stop you right there for a second though? But when
Yeah.
I see you, even though we talk about this heavy stuff, you always have like a spirit of joy.
Oh,
Even when it's so palpable. I mean, I just when I see you, even though you talk about some of these hard things, you always have joy. And I appreciate that and admire that. But anyway, go ahead.
but I think it's rooted in my faith, right? I mean, I do think I think it's possible. I think even as we think about fear or creating new policies, like when you believe anything is possible, you move differently, right? And even, I mean, even in this moment in time, and which is interesting because even in this moment in time where DEI policies are like questionable and under attack and all the things, and I've been pretty consistent to say like this isn't about change in a positive way. This is about compliance and inhumane treatment of people, and that I can't agree with. Right? I don't think. I don't think that is what we're here for. I think we're here for people having their best lives ever, being of service, being kind to other people, making a difference in the world while we're here. And I think that's true for all of us, not just for some of us. And so I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that also believes that. And so, I mean, good example, like when I got here, they're like, we're going to give you the tuition reimbursement program. I don't know what that has to do with diversity. But in my mind, I was like, well, it has a lot to do with diversity because some people, regardless of race, some people don't have the opportunity to go to college. Like their family can't afford it, or maybe they're in a rural or an urban setting where they didn't have like calculus. So they couldn't have scored perfect on that SAT test to get a scholarship to college. None of this is our fault. And then I look at the opportunity that's in front of me because at first I was like, "Why are you giving me this? Like, I don't want this. Like, this is nothing." And I was like, I kind of quieted myself. I'm like, "All right, God, you gave me this. Let's see what we're gonna do with it, right?" And I was like, how can I help people with this policy?" So the policy was that you could pay for school and then we would give you the money back. And I was like, well, some people can't pay for it, like don't have an extra five or $10,000 to pay for school, so we can reimburse them. I was like, what if we just paid the school directly? And what if we increased it? It was 3,500, but the federal guideline is 5,500. So what if we increased it to the federal guideline? And what if
Wow.
we increased it $2,500 more for graduate school? Because really, graduate school is more expensive than undergrad to 7,500. Just saying to people, we're willing to invest another $2,500 in you because we believe in your career aspirations and growth here. What's $2,500 for retention? It cost me 1.5 times your salary to replace you. So for $2,500, if that keeps you here a year longer or 3 years longer, we have gotten way more out of it, right? From a business perspective than we even put into it. And you might actually like us more and recruit people and want to stay longer than your 3 years. I mean, all of these things are very good. So the game changer was that we also opened it up to the stores, so our store employees didn't have access to any of it. And those were, the people who sell our shoes in our 800 stores, and so we opened it up to them nationwide. And so the new policy is it's $5,000 for undergrad, which means you can go to any community college at almost any state school for free. We pay the school directly. There's no out of pocket cost. There's no contract. You don't have to sign a contract that you'll stay with us after we're done.
Wow.
And out of the, I don't know, we usually have about 150 people enrolled at one time per semester. Um, so far, we've only had one person who you know used it and then left right after. Everybody else is still with us, or with us for a reasonable amount of time afterwards. So, but
That's
what a
incredible.
gift, right? I mean, like,
Is Polaris hiring?
always
People.
hiring. We're always looking for great people. But I think that is the obligation. Like, what if every major company in St. Louis did that? It would create the bridge in our educational system for people to continue their education, continue learning, continue contributing to the workforce, but also the community in ways that we've never imagined. Like, I had a woman who didn't do well in high school, so she wasn't going to go to college. And I was like, oh, but that was years ago. Like, you're way smarter than you were in high school. I mean, you've been working for a dozen years, more than an 18-year-old. She's knocking out
Yeah.
of the park, almost done with her associate's degree. And that was cool. What was cooler was when she said, I was sitting at the table doing my homework, and my daughter looked over at me and said, I wasn't thinking about going to college, but now I am. And I was like,
Her mom, inspired by her mom.
game changer,
Game changer for sure.
game
That's
changer.
incredible. And that's incredible work. Isabel Wilkerson,
Mm,
Pulitzer Prize winning author, says that we've inherited this house, like America. She describes America as a house, and it has all these issues. It's broken down. It needs all these repairs and all that, and it's left up to all of us to do the work. Um, and I think that's true. If we can do it together, it's not up to, like you said, for African American people to become weary telling their stories, or what did you call it?
grief.
Porn, grief porn. That does become overwhelming, and sometimes it falls on deaf ears. My story about my son, maybe your story about your son, or what is it that can actually, and I'm thinking what scripture says, but even outside of that, for people who may not subscribe to the Bible, that can that can really propel us, especially in this moment in time, into seeing one another, loving one another, coming out of our comfort zones, the things that we've been talking about for so long now. What are the practical steps? I mean, envisioning it as a house that needs repair, that's a great analogy that Isabel Wilkerson has given to us, as we move forward, as generations move forward. It's up to us to fix this. Um, how do we practically do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really great books out. I mean, Cast is a great book. I mean, I would highly recommend that. We did it here at Claris Book Club. We had almost 400 people in it. It was cool. Um, Cast is a great book for people to just gain additional understanding because I don't think it's the heart of people usually that makes us act the way that we act. I think it's our limited information, and I honestly think it's our fear. So when I think about, how do we push past our fear? And try get like I'm a divorced mom, and I remember when I first got divorced, I was not ever going to get married again, and I was never going to date again, and I was never going to love again. And the good news is that, after 5 years, I decided I would start dating again, and I loved again. And so I think we have to remind ourselves of like moments when we did overcome adversity, and like let that be our mantra or metric. If you don't believe in a higher power, that's fine for you, right? I mean, I'm kind of easy. The blades of grass and flowers on trees had me, but the 28 songs the cardinal bird can sing. I mean, I'm and all of that. That just feels so extra. But
Yeah.
let's just say you don't like think of a time when you overcame a hard spot and you had success. And I think is, instead of putting the times where you feel like you failed as your guide, put the times when you were winning and let that be your guidepost. And we're usually afraid to connect because we're afraid of rejection. I'm just going to offer like the joys of love outweigh the few moments of rejection we may have ever faced. And I would just encourage people to move towards love all the time. Like you get way more than you ever could have imagined in relationships, meeting strangers, like the whole thing. Like I'm friends with the people I rode planes with. I'm like, oh, we're here together on a plane. It was meant to be, right? It was meant to be. Are
I
you
am
going to
not
live in St.
surprised by that.
Louis? Yeah. Here's my
I
number.
love
If
it.
you need anything, call me, right? I'll take you to dinner, like all the things.
Yeah. Well, you talk about that too, fictive kinship,
Yeah.
the fact that we can be, you know, akin to one another and see one another as brothers and sisters and cousins and
Across
aunties and
race.
uncles.
Yeah. As soon as we decide. As soon
So
as we
it's a
decide.
decision.
It is a
It's a
decision.
decision.
It
Yeah.
is a decision like love is a decision. It is a decision. Living is a decision.
Forgiveness. Yeah.
Forgiveness is a decision. We make these decisions all the time. Um, I think sometimes, and I use love as an example because sometimes I'm I feel like I'm talking about ending racism and I'm talking to people and they're like look very glossed over, and I was like, okay, this is like trying to explain to a young person what love is like, but they've never been on a date. And you sound like you're out of your mind. Like, no, one day you're gonna meet this person, they're gonna walk in the room and you're just gonna start smiling. They're like, not gonna happen, right? If you meet like an 8-year-old who hates, boy who hates girls, and they're like, yeah, I'm never doing that. I'm never gonna, like, and then you like give it some time, right?
Give it a little time. Yeah.
And for other people like me who got hurt, right, somewhere along the way, it was helpful to have reminders of other people who had some success in love and that it was possible for me again, even when I didn't believe it for myself. And I think we have to be there for each other to remind each other if I never get married again, I'm still worthy of being loved. And I have friends who love me and it shows up in very different ways. And I think we need each other. I mean, we need each other. If maybe that's where we start, just admitting that we need each other. I don't know if you've heard me do I love the parable of the lost sheep. But one of the things about sheep is if they fall down, they can't get up by themselves. They actually need help. And I was like, we're like sheep. I mean, this is good. So many they like to be in clusters. I mean, we're a lot like sheep. Like this was a good one. Like, oh, people are actually like sheep in many, many ways, right?
Yeah.
They can't see. They can only see about 6 feet in front of themselves, so they get lost. I was like, look, we get lost. Right? Like 6 feet at a time. We have to
It's a
find
great
each other six
parable.
feet at a time. It's a great one, right? I was like, this is a good one. So yeah, I think whenever we decide that I'm going to look at people as if they're my cousin or my sister or my brother, like how I treat them is so different. It's so much more loving.
Yeah. One other thing I want to talk about before I let you go is the aspect of healing.
Mm,
So many people of color, not just African American people, other people in America are impacted by racism, have been impacted by racism. But I've heard so much from the Black community about, when it comes to protesting right now, we're not doing that. We don't want to do that.
mm,
We are sitting down. We told you this is your problem, all of that. How do you react to that in light of what you just said? Because I'm looking at it again through the lens of scripture. We can't not
mm,
address things. We are called to address as believers in Jesus Christ. That's where I'm coming from. We're
mm.
called to work toward unity. We're called to forgive and all of that. But for people who are really hurting,
Mm.
and really can't understand, not to get into politics, but it's hard to not get into politics when so much of what we're dealing with right now is related to it. For people who just say, I'm done,
Mm.
what
Yeah,
is
I
your
mean, I think, look, we're going to be tested. Our faith is going to be tested. I think this is one of those moments where our faith is tested. And I like joy as a word, but I also like witnessing as a word. And I think these are the moments where I think Black people need to witness white people speaking up for them and other people who don't look like them, not just for themselves. And so I've been to the protest anyway, because I think there's a power in witnessing, and and I don't think people should go it alone. And I do understand the fatigue, right? Like Ferguson was 10 years ago, but we've been doing this like forever. Like, that was a moment, and there were many more moments. So I understand the fatigue. I don't actually talk about healing a lot as a person, just because so much is still happening. I think it's hard to heal when things are still happening. But I do talk about forgiving. And for me, in my walk, my journey, I had to realize like people don't know. And once I realized like people didn't know, I was less harsh and critical of them and more apt to try to get close to them, because the knowing, once you know, you can't not know. Um, yeah, once you know, you cannot know. Um, and I want it for them. Like as much as I want it for myself, I want it for other people too. That closeness, that I think is possible. So I know it's possible because I've witnessed it before. I've seen it before. I've seen people who were very anti-Black, um, figure out like they got a script handed to them and they've been reading that script, and they don't have to read that script anymore, and just how free and liberated they feel around that. I've seen people who thought they were voting for something and realized it was going to hurt people in a way that they could not have imagined, and they're sorry. And I do think it's our role to forgive them for a rash, like a moment in time of judgment, right? And let me be even more transparent. Like I've had to be forgiven, and I've had to forgive myself for some things. And so I think the same amount of grace that we would give people that we do know and love, I think we should give to strangers too, and welcome them back in the fold of humanity and seeing each other again. And I think that will be the difference between where we are now and where we are a year from now.
I can't think of a better way to end our conversation. This is why I love you and appreciate you, and so grateful that you were able to come back and be on the podcast. Amy Hunter, blessings upon blessings to you, and thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Thank you for checking out the podcast. You can listen to previous episodes of Unity in Christ on Spotify, and stay tuned for more on YouTube. You can also check out my website for more information at laurenlittrellspeaks.com. And remember, they will know we are Christians by our love.